The DJI Osmo Pocket 4P is a powerful tool for capturing incredible time lapses. I've experimented with the Pocket 4P for several weeks now, doing a whole bunch of different time lapses, and I've figured out what works best. Now, before I show you the settings, I do want to mention there's one tool that you have to have for a time lapse, because you need to be able to keep your Pocket 4P still while the time lapse is going. You don't want your camera moving at all. So that one tool you need is a tripod. This one was $20. It's nothing fancy, but it works quite well. And there is one more tool. This tool is optional, but it is going to help you take your time lapses to the very highest level. And I'll tell you why in a moment when we go through the settings. But that tool is a set of ND filters. This one right here from Freewell that includes the polarizer. I find that these work especially well with time lapses because that polarizer effect can really help if you're around water or if you want to really capture the depth of those colors in the sky. So I'll link to these in the description below in case you want to check them out. And what you want to do is you want to make sure you're in time-lapse mode. So if you're not in time-lapse mode, you're just going to toggle and it's going to be on the right. And then once you're in time-lapse mode, you want to first decide if you're doing a standard time-lapse and not doing a motion lapse, you can actually pick between the 1x and the 3x lens. And I actually did a 3x time lapse the other day and it was pretty cool. I didn't know how I would feel about it, but I did it and it looked cool. So select one of those first. And then once you've selected that, you're gonna toggle up. And here's where you can decide between time lapse and motion lapse. So I'm gonna show you the time lapse functionality first, and then we'll talk about motion lapse as well. So once you've done that, you're gonna swipe up again, and this time you're gonna select your parameters. If you're doing a sunset time lapse or a time lapse you're gonna have going for a couple hours, I recommend doing the 2-second interval. But if you're gonna have a longer time lapse, and I recommend increasing the interval, you can go all the way up to 1 minute on here. Basically, your interval is 1 frame. So if you would like any help in calculating what the actual duration of your finished product time lapse is gonna be, you can toggle this down here. And so if you set your video duration to 5 minutes, what that means is your Pocket 4P is going to record for 5 minutes and then it's going to stop. And at a 2-second interval, you're gonna end up with a 5-second time lapse. So you can toggle around. If you go to 1 hour of actual recording time at 2 seconds, you'll have 1 minute for the finished product time lapse. If you go to the 5-second interval at 1 hour of actual recording time, you'll have a 24-second time lapse. I highly recommend doing the infinity for the duration. That way you can start and stop your time lapse when you want to. And then we're going to go back here and we're gonna swipe down. And then we're going to do our advanced parameters over here. So we're gonna swipe in from the right. The first section here is exposure. Check out the shutter speed up here. The shutter speed is currently 1/3200. Now, if you know anything about shutter speeds, you'll know that is a very fast shutter speed. And you can use that shutter speed, but if you do that, you're going to end up with a time lapse that has a lot of sharp, very choppy frames. Those frames are not going to flow smoothly. They're going to be very jarring, and they're going to feel kind of jittery when watching them. So this is where the ND filters come in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab an ND filter and I'm going to put it on, and I'm going to show you how that changes the shutter speed. So because we are facing toward the sun right now and it is still pretty bright, I am going to select ND32 for my ND filter. So I've got ND32 right here, and I'm going to pop it on. So to pop on the filter, we want to first power off the camera. And then what we want to do is we want to twist this right here gently to the left, and it's going to pop right off. And then what we want to do with our ND filter is we want to line it up. So we want to have the big one down here for the 1 inch and the little one up here for the 3x. So we're going to pop this into the grooves, and we're going to turn gently to the right, and it's going to lock into place right there. So now we're going to power it back on, and we're going to check out the exposure settings now. So now if we swipe in from the right and click on exposure, our shutter speed is all the way down to 1/100. So we went from 1/3200 to 1/100. That is a drastic difference, and this is going to yield really nice, smooth frames in your time lapse. It's going to flow very nicely, and it's going to look very professional. And my shutter speed will only get slower and slower as it gets dark. Let me demonstrate that here. So if I hold this in front of it, watch the shutter speed. It goes all the way down to about 2 seconds right there. So as it gets darker, your shutter speed is going to get slower and slower, while the camera works to still get a balanced exposure. Basically, as long as it is about 1/120 or slower, that's the shutter speed I like to see for time lapses. And then for the ISO settings over here, I like to set these to 100 to 200. I don't like to set purely static values in a time lapse because lighting is going to constantly be changing during a time lapse, and if I set static values, then I'm going to get parts of the time lapse that are either overexposed or underexposed, but rarely at that perfect exposure. So that is the reason I don't set any manual values in this mode. So once we set those, we're going to go over here to white balance. And for white balance, I recommend setting this to auto white balance because your white balance is going to be changing throughout your time lapse as well. And even if you do the photo mode to edit the photos later on, when you grade those photos, you can sync all of your other settings, and then the white balance you can just leave set for each individual photo. Some exceptions to that would be if you're doing just a sunset. If you are, you could do manual, and you could set this to 6500K and the tint at 0. In addition, if you're doing a time lapse during the middle of the day with very consistent conditions, you could do 5600K. Since we are close to sunset right now, I'm going to set this to 6500K, and I'm going to get it ready for that. So for the format down here, you have a couple different options. You have video plus JPEG, and video plus RAW. I personally do the video plus RAW, and the reason for that is in video mode, you cannot do D-Log2 or D-Log. You're going to have everything baked into that video file, and you're not going to really be able to customize that later on. So the reason I like the RAW photos is because I can edit those later on, and I can sync all of my edits, and I can really fine tune them. There's a lot of dynamic range in each photo. And then you sync those photos in a photo program, and then you import them into your video editor of choice, and then you have a time lapse. But if you don't want to go through all of that, and you know you don't, just put this to the video mode. But if there's a chance you want to edit photos later on, then you want to do video plus RAW. I don't recommend video plus JPEG because JPEG is not going to have the editing flexibility that RAW does. And then finally, for focus mode down here, continuous or single is largely going to depend on if you have anything in your foreground that you don't want the camera to focus on, or you don't want it jumping between foreground and background. If you want it to keep a single focus, then you want to select single. And it explains down here, autofocus operates one single time, which is suitable for capturing motionless subjects. So that is where in general, I just keep continuous, and I find that it works well for me. So once you have keyed in all those settings, you are good to go, and you can start your time-lapse recording. And what it's going to do is it's going to start recording there, and then the screen is going to go black, and that is going to help you save some battery power while you're doing the time lapse. Which, by the way, if you're doing a really long time lapse, you're going to want to have an external battery pack to hook up to this. There are a couple power banks that I use with this when I'm doing long ones. I'll link to those in the description below as well. But let's say you don't want to do a conventional time lapse. Let's say you want to do a motion lapse. What we're going to do for that is we're going to toggle over here, and then we're going to set up those parameters. But one thing to note is for a motion lapse, you cannot choose between the 1x or the 3x. You do have to do the 1x. First of all, in the upper left, make sure it's 4K 30. But then here in the upper right where it says 2, you can actually set more than 2 waypoints now. Now, I don't know if this was here when I first bought the 4P, or if it came with a recent firmware update. But either way, being able to set 4 waypoints is even cooler. And then down here, I recommend keeping it set to screen off. It's gonna help save your battery. So here, we're gonna swipe up to set our parameters. And for the interval for motion lapses, I usually like to keep it at 2 seconds because they're not gonna be super long. And then usually my sweet spot for those is 2 seconds at 30 minutes. It's going to yield the finished product 30-second time lapse. And that gives me plenty of flexibility if I want to speed it up more, or if I want to cut it up a little bit, anything like that. So once I've set those parameters, I'm going to swipe down. And this is where we're going to set our waypoints. So if you see the plus sign right here, that's going to represent where our first waypoint's going to be. So I'm going to go left, and I'm going to pick right here for my first waypoint. And in fact, I'm going to start it looking down a little bit right here. So I'm going to hit the plus sign. So now we can set our second waypoint. So I'm going to raise it up, and I'm going to go right to here. And now we can set our third waypoint. So I'm going to go over to here, and I'm going to raise it up even more. Now, the thing to keep in mind with 4 waypoints is if you want that motion to stay on a single continuous plane from point 1 to point 2, then you want to use 2. But if you want the motion to change during a different part of the time lapse, when you do 4, that's going to be possible. But just keep in mind the time lapse is not going to keep that consistent speed and motion unless the distance between waypoints 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 is the same as between 1 and 2. Which is not going to be likely, so keep that in mind. Toggle up here, and I'm going to set 3. And then for number 4, I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to toggle up even more. And I'm going to have it end right there. So now if we do the preview, it's going to show us the preview of what the time lapse will look like. So you can see there, after waypoint 2, how it kind of jumps up. So if you don't want it to do that type of jump, then you would want to do just 2 waypoints. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back here, and we're going to set it to 2. So for 2, we're going to go over here, and we're going to go down a little bit, and we're going to set our first waypoint right there. And then I'm going to go all the way over here, and I'm going to go up for our final waypoint. And this can point pretty high. There's actually a lot of range that we can achieve here. It's going to thunderstorm soon, I think, so that's going to be fun. So I set waypoint 2 there. So now let's preview these. So we start right there, and we go all the way up to there for the time lapse. Which, by the way, that looks so cool. I'm actually going to record the time lapse right now with that. But all of these other settings here will remain the same. So for exposure, it's going to be 100 to 200, 100 to 200, and our shutter speed is 1 at 60 right now with our lighting. I'm going to keep the format video plus raw, and the white balance I'm going to change to 6500K. Hit the check, and let's start it going. And I'm going to come back to this in half an hour, and hopefully it doesn't rain on it because this camera is technically not waterproof. I don't know how wet it could get before it gets destroyed. And if you'd like to learn more about how to get best results with the Pocket 4P, check out this playlist right here.